You've seen entitled people throw tantrums before, but nothing will prepare you for the moment a woman's arrogance cost her an entire career in less than 60 seconds. When a wealthy executive tried to force a casually dressed black man to carry her oversized luxury luggage at JFK Airport, she thought she was putting a nobody in his place. She didn't know he was the newly appointed CEO of her parent company, and her entire board of directors was watching. Fluorescent lights buzzed with a low, almost imperceptible hum, high above the polished concourse of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4. It was early that specific kind of hazy Tuesday morning where the airport is a chaotic blend of exhausted red-eye arrivals and hyper-caffeinated business travelers preparing for transatlantic flights. Sitting quietly in a plush leather armchair near Gate B24, Dalen Fisher was enjoying a rare moment of absolute peace. Dalen was a man who appreciated anonymity. At 42, he had just been appointed the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Holdings, a massive multinational conglomerate known for aggressively acquiring mismanaged tech and strategy firms and turning them around. The press release announcing his new position wasn't scheduled to go live until 9 a.m. Eastern Time the following day, right as he stepped into Vanguard's London headquarters. For now, he was just a man waiting for a flight. He intentionally dressed down for long-haul travel, wearing a pair of dark, tailored denim jeans, crisp white sneakers, and a plain, high-quality charcoal grey hoodie. He looked comfortable, unassuming, and completely relaxed as he scrolled through a quarterly earnings report on his tablet. That peace shattered the moment Bobby Scott marched into the gate area. Bobby was a woman who moved through the world as if she owned the very air she breathed. As the Senior Vice President of Global Strategy for Zenith Innovations, a mid-tier firm that Vanguard Holdings had just quietly acquired, she was accustomed to absolute compliance from everyone around her. She was immaculately dressed in a tailored cream pantsuit that practically screamed high maintenance, paired with severe stiletto heels that clicked sharply against the terrazzo floor. But what made her stand out was the ridiculous mountain of luggage she was attempting to manage. She had a massive, heavy-looking Rimowa trunk, an oversized Goyard tote bag slung over her shoulder, and a bulky garment bag that kept slipping from her grasp. Bobby was not having a good morning. Her private car service had been 15 minutes late, her preferred espresso order had been made with the wrong milk, and the VIP Skycap service she usually demanded had been unavailable due to a shift change. By the time she reached the gate for the London flight, she was a tightly coiled spring of entitlement and irritation, looking for anyone to take the brunt of her frustration. Her sharp, icy blue eyes scanned the seating area and landed directly on Dalen. In Bobby's incredibly narrow worldview, the airport hierarchy was simple. People in suits were peers, people in uniforms were servants, and anyone dressed casually in her vicinity was either a lost tourist or an off-duty baggage handler who owed her assistance. She noted Dalen's dark skin, his casual grey hoodie, and the fact that he was sitting near the priority lane stanchions. Without a second of hesitation, she made a snap judgment that would permanently alter the trajectory of her life. "Excuse me." Bobby barked, her voice slicing through the ambient noise of the terminal like a serrated knife. Dalen didn't look up immediately, assuming the sharp tone was directed at a gate agent. He simply swiped to the next page of his financial report. "I said excuse me," Bobby snapped louder, stepping closer. She dropped the heavy garment bag onto the floor, right at the toe of Dalen's white sneakers. Dalen finally looked up, his expression neutral, but curious. He pulled one wireless earbud from his ear. "Are you speaking to me, Mom?" "Obviously I am speaking to you," Bobby said, her lip curling into a sneer. She gestured wildly to her heavy Rimowa trunk and the fallen garment bag. I have been dragging these bags from the security checkpoint because your terminal's skycap desk was completely abandoned. I need these taken down the jet bridge immediately, and I need the garment bag hung in the first-class closet. Do not scuff the trunk." Dalen stared at her for a long, silent moment. He had spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder, navigating boardrooms filled with aggressive, arrogant executives, but the sheer, unadulterated audacity of this woman was genuinely astonishing. He looked around, checking to see if there was a uniformed airline employee standing behind him that she might be addressing. There was no one, just a terrified-looking teenager 3 seats down who was pretending not to watch the unfolding scene. "I think you're confused," Dalen said, his voice deep calm and remarkably steady. "I don't work for the airline." Bobby scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. The diamonds on her wrist caught the harsh terminal light. "Oh, please, don't give me that attitude. You people are always looking for ways to avoid doing your jobs. I know you work here. You're standing right by the priority lane, and frankly, I am in no mood to argue with support staff today. Grab the bags." "Ma'am," Dalen said, leaning forward slightly, his tone remaining perfectly even despite the rising insult. "I am a passenger on this flight. I am waiting to board just like you. I suggest you take your bags to the desk over there if you need to check them." "A passenger?" Bobby let out a harsh, condescending laugh that turned the heads of several other travelers waiting nearby. She looked him up and down, her eyes lingering on his hoodie with overt disgust. "On a transatlantic flight to London, in the priority boarding area, I seriously doubt that. Stop lying, pick up my luggage and do your job before I find your manager, and ensure you are ringing up fast food for the rest of your miserable life." Dalen didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up to intimidate her. He simply locked eyes with her, his analytical mind already categorizing her behavior. He wasn't just annoyed, he was calculating. "I strongly advise you to step back, manage your own luggage, and reconsider how you speak to people." Dalen said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the distinct authoritative weight of a man who commanded thousands of employees. For a fraction of a second, Bobby hesitated. There was something in his eyes, a cold, unflinching authority that didn't match her assumption of his status. But her ego quickly swallowed her doubt. Nobody spoke to Bobby Scott like that. "How dare you?" She hissed, her face flushing an angry mottled pink. "I am a senior vice president at Zenith Innovations. I am traveling for a highly sensitive merger meeting that is worth more than you will make in 10 lifetimes. I will not be disrespected by an airport lackey." Dalen's internal radar instantly pinged. Zenith Innovations. The pieces fell into place with absolute, terrifying clarity. Dalen knew exactly who she was. He had read her personnel file 3 days ago. Bobby Scott, SVP of Global Strategy. The executive notes had described her as effective but abrasive. It seemed abrasive was a generous corporate euphemism for a nightmare. Dalen leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, cold smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Zenith Innovations, you say fascinating. Don't you patronize me?" Bobby shrieked, finally drawing the attention of the lead gate agent, a harried-looking man named Michael, who came rushing over from the podium. People were openly staring now. The quiet morning atmosphere of Gate B24 had evaporated, replaced by the tense, suffocating energy of a public spectacle. Travelers lowered their newspapers, paused their music, and leaned in their eyes, darting between the furious woman in the cream suit and the remarkably composed man in the grey hoodie. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Michael the gate agent asked, breathlessly, as he arrived. He glanced nervously at Bobby's mountain of luggage. "Yes, there is a massive problem." Bobby pivoted sharply, aiming her fury at Michael. "This employee of yours is refusing to assist me with my bags. Worse, he has been incredibly insolent, lying to my face and refusing to do the job he is paid for. I want his name. I want his supervisor down here immediately, and I want him fired before my flight takes off." Michael blinked, thoroughly confused. He looked at Dalen, trying to place him. "Ma'am, I don't know who this gentleman is, but he doesn't work for Delta or the airport authority. He's not wearing a badge or a uniform." "Oh, don't try to cover for him," Bobby snapped, slapping her hand against the handle of her Rimowa trunk. "It is a classic union tactic protecting the lazy workers. Look at him. Does he look like someone flying first class to London? He's clearly off-duty baggage staff, loitering in the priority area. I demand you take action." Dalen slowly stood up. At 6'2", he towered over Bobby, but his posture remained relaxed, non-threatening. He looked at Michael with a sympathetic expression. "It's all right, Michael, isn't it? I apologize you have to deal with this." Dalen reached into his pocket, pulled out his boarding pass and handed it to the gate agent. "I am indeed a passenger. Seat 1A. Michael glanced at the thick, premium stock of the first-class boarding pass, noting the diamond medallion status printed at the top. His eyes widened slightly as he registered the name, though he kept his professional composure. "Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Everything is in order. We will be calling priority boarding in about 10 minutes. He handed the pass back, then turned to Bobby, his tone hardening. "Ma'am, as I stated, this gentleman is a first-class passenger. Now, if you need assistance with your bags, you need to step back to the main concourse desk. You cannot block the boarding lane." Bobby stared at the boarding pass in Dalen's hand, her brain struggling to process the information. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. In her mind, wealth and status looked like her tailored suits, diamond watches, aggressive entitlement. It did not look like a black man in a hoodie, quietly reading on a tablet. Instead of feeling embarrassed by her colossal mistake, she felt a surge of defensive rage. He had tricked her. He was purposely dressing like a vagrant to embarrass people of actual standing. "Well," Bobby said, her voice dripping with venom, desperate to salvage her pride, "it seems the airline's standards for first class have severely plummeted. They'll let anyone sit up front these days. Probably used miles from some low-level credit card." She snatched up her garment bag, her face a mask of furious indignation. "Just stay out of my way," she sneered at Dalen. "Some of us actually have important corporate business to attend to in London." "I'll be sure to remember that," Dalen replied smoothly, his voice devoid of anger, but heavy with implication. "Have a wonderful flight, Miss Scott." Bobby froze. She hadn't given him her name. She had only mentioned Zenith Innovations. A flicker of unease finally penetrated her armor of arrogance, but she quickly dismissed it. He probably just saw her luggage tags. She yanked her trunk forward and stormed toward the priority line, positioning herself at the absolute front, determined to be the first person on the aircraft. Dalen watched her go, shaking his head slightly. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket and drafted a quick encrypted message. To Richard Caldwell, chairman of the board, Vanguard Holdings message. "Richard, I'm at the gate. Had an interesting run-in with the Zenith SVP of Strategy. Bobby Scott. We need to discuss her position immediately upon arrival. She lacks the temperament and judgment required for the Vanguard transition. See you on board." He hit send and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Vanguard Holdings was ruthless about corporate culture. They acquired companies not just for their assets, but for their synergy. An executive who treated supposed subordinates like garbage in public was a massive liability. If this was how Bobby Scott treated a stranger in an airport, Dalen could only imagine the toxic environment she fostered among her junior staff at Zenith. 10 minutes later, the overhead speakers chimed. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are now inviting our first class and Diamond Medallion members to board Flight 408 to London Heathrow. Bobby practically shoved her way past the scanner, demanding Michael manually carry her oversized tote down the jet bridge. Dalen waited patiently, allowing a few other passengers to go ahead of him, before he quietly scanned his pass and walked down the sloping tunnel toward the aircraft. The heavy mechanical smell of jet fuel and the soft, welcoming lighting of the Boeing 777 cabin greeted him. This flight was about to be an incredibly educational experience. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 was an oasis of luxury featuring private suites with sliding doors, mood lighting, and seats that converted into fully flat beds. It was designed to insulate high-paying travelers from the stresses of the outside world. But as Dalen stepped into the cabin, he could already hear Bobby's shrill voice echoing off the curved ceiling. "No, absolutely not. This garment bag cannot be folded. Do you understand? It contains a bespoke designer suit for a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition meeting." Bobby was currently lecturing the lead flight attendant, a remarkably patient woman named Sarah Jenkins. Bobby was standing in the aisle next to seat 2A, completely blocking the path for the passengers boarding behind her. "I understand, Ma'am," Sarah said, maintaining a flawless customer service smile, despite the tension in her eyes. "I am just trying to make space in the forward closet. If you'll just allow me to gently shift, do not shift it. Just hang it up properly," Bobby commanded, snapping her fingers, as if she were directing a misbehaving golden retriever. Dalen paused in the aisle just behind her. "Excuse me," he said mildly. Bobby whipped around her eyes, narrowing as she saw him. Her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. "You—" She spat the word dripping with disdain. "I should have known you'd be sitting near me. Just my luck." "I'm in 1A," Dalen said, pointing to the spacious suite directly in front of hers. "You're blocking the aisle, Mrs. Scott." Bobby scoffed violently, yanking her Rimowa trunk into her suite, banging it against the polished wood paneling of the seat console. Sarah winced at the impact. Bobby finally stepped out of the way, allowing Dalen to slide into the front row. Dalen settled into 1A, stowing his small leather backpack under the ottoman. He accepted a glass of pre-departure sparkling water from Sarah with a polite nod and a genuine thank you. Bobby, meanwhile, continued her reign of terror from 2A. Once she was settled, she leaned forward, speaking loudly enough for the entire quiet cabin to hear. "Excuse me, flight attendant. Sarah, is it?" Sarah stepped over, holding a tray of champagne. "Yes, Ms. Scott. How can I help you?" "I just want to be absolutely clear," Bobby said, her voice projecting clearly. "I am a high-ranking executive at Zenith Innovations. I have incredibly important documents to review for our acquisition by Vanguard Holdings. I need absolute silence. I do not want to be disturbed by distracting elements." She cast a pointed, venomous glare at the back of Dalen's head, visible over the privacy divider. "I also want to ensure that the security on this aircraft is up to par. It's concerning how easily some people slip into premium cabins these days." Sarah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She glanced at Dalen, who was calmly sipping his water, seemingly ignoring the entire rant. "Miss Scott, I can assure you all passengers in this cabin are ticketed and verified. We will ensure you have a quiet flight." "See that you do," Bobby huffed, reclining her seat slightly. She pulled out a thick bound dossier, embossed with the Zenith Innovations logo, and loudly slammed it onto her tray table. "When Vanguard realizes the asset they've acquired in me, I'll be flying private anyway. This commercial nonsense is exhausting." Dalen sat quietly in 1A, his tablet resting on his lap. He opened a blank digital notepad and began typing bullet points. Observation 1. Bobby Scott demonstrates severe lack of emotional regulation. Observation 2. Openly discusses confidential merger details, Vanguard/Zenith, in a public, unsecured setting. Observation 3. Hostile toward service staff. Creates a toxic, disruptive environment. Recommendation: immediate termination upon finalization of the merger. As Dalen was typing, a commotion at the front of the aircraft caught his attention. The final boarding call had been made, and the last group of stragglers was making their way down the jet bridge. A group of 4 people entered the first-class cabin, bringing with them an air of distinct, sharp authority. They were dressed in impeccable tailored business wear. Leading the group was Richard Caldwell, a distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and a sharp, calculating gaze. He was the chairman of the board for Vanguard Holdings, a legendary figure in the corporate finance world. Behind him walked Eleanor Higgins, Vanguard's chief financial officer. Marcus Vance, wait, prompt, says no Marcus Vance. Let me correct the names. Behind him walked Gregory Thorne. No Thorne is banned. Behind him walked Gregory Pearce, Vanguard's chief operating officer, and Cynthia Flores, the head of global human resources. They moved down the aisle with quiet confidence, finding their seats in rows 3 and 4. Bobby, who had been aggressively highlighting her dossier, looked up as the group passed her suite. Her eyes went wide. She immediately recognized Richard Caldwell from his Forbes cover features and industry profiles. This was the man her CEO had been scrambling to please for the last 6 months. This was the Vanguard board. Bobby's entire demeanor shifted instantly. The scowling, abrasive woman vanished, replaced by a hyper-alert, sycophantic corporate climber. She quickly adjusted her blazer, smoothed her hair, and plastered on a bright, eager smile. She waited until Richard was stowing his briefcase in the overhead bin near row 3 before making her move. "Mr. Caldwell." Bobby called out, her voice suddenly sweet and dripping with professional deference. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, leaning over her console to extend a hand. "Richard Caldwell, I am Bobby Scott, Senior Vice President of Global Strategy for Zenith Innovations. What an absolute honor to be on the same flight as you." Richard Caldwell paused, turning his head to look at her. He had a stern face that rarely showed emotion, a trait that made him a terrifying negotiator. He glanced at her extended hand, then slowly looked at her face. "Mrs. Scott?" "Yes, I recognize the name." "I am so thrilled to finally meet you in person," Bobby gushed, completely oblivious to the coldness in his tone. "I've been diving deep into the merger logistics all morning. I am entirely committed to making the Vanguard transition seamless. In fact, I was just reviewing the restructuring proposals. I'd love to buy you a drink and discuss my vision for the subsidiary once we're in the air." Richard Caldwell looked past Bobby, his eyes drifting to the suite directly in front of hers. Seat 1A. Dalen Fisher had turned around in his seat. He was resting his chin on his hand, a look of mild, profound amusement on his face as he watched Bobby grovel. "I appreciate your dedication, Ms. Scott," Richard said, his voice dry as dust. "However, I don't think that will be necessary. You see, the board and I aren't handling the restructuring details of Zenith Innovations. We leave those operational decisions entirely up to our new Chief Executive Officer." Bobby nodded vigorously, completely missing the trap being laid. Of course, the new CEO. The press release drops tomorrow, right? I am so eager to meet him. I know we are going to work brilliantly together. I have a proven track record of supporting visionary leadership." "I'm glad to hear you say that," Richard Caldwell said. A genuine, slightly predatory smile finally broke across the older man's face. He gestured toward the front row. "Because you've been sitting behind him for the last 20 minutes. Bobby froze. The eager smile remained plastered on her face, but her eyes darted back and forth confused. She looked toward the front of the cabin. The only person sitting in row 1 was the man in the grey hoodie, the man she had tried to force into carrying her bags, the man she had tried to get fired from the airport. I don't understand, Bobby stammered, a cold, icy dread beginning to pool in the pit of her stomach. Dalen stood up slowly from seat 1A. He didn't look like an off-duty baggage handler anymore. The way he stood, the way the board members instantly fell silent and attentive as he rose, the sheer gravity of his presence suddenly filled the cabin. He looked down at Bobby, his expression entirely unreadable. "Hello again, Bobby," Dalen said quietly. "As Richard mentioned, I'm Dalen Fisher, the new CEO of Vanguard Holdings." For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the first-class cabin was the soft hum of the Boeing 777's auxiliary power unit and the clinking of a flight attendant preparing glassware in the forward galley. Bobby Scott stood frozen in the aisle, her hand still half extended toward Richard Caldwell, her face entirely drained of color. Her brain violently rejected the information she had just been given. It was fundamentally impossible. CEOs of multi-billion-dollar holding companies wore Brioni suits and Patek Philippe watches. They commanded entourages. They did not wear grey hoodies, sit quietly in terminal chairs, and allow themselves to be spoken to like misbehaving children. The man standing in front of her, looking at her with an expression of mild, detached scrutiny, simply could not be Dalen Fisher. I think there has been a profound misunderstanding." Bobby finally stammered, her voice thin and reedy, completely devoid of its usual commanding resonance. She nervously pulled her hand back, wiping a sudden sheen of sweat from her palm onto the expensive fabric of her cream pantsuit. "A joke, surely? Mr. Caldwell, you have quite the sense of humor." Richard Caldwell did not smile. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored jacket and looked at her with the cold, calculating stare that had made him a legend on Wall Street. "I rarely make jokes regarding the leadership of my company, Ms. Scott, and I certainly do not joke about the behavior I just witnessed." Bobby's eyes darted frantically back to Dalen. The cognitive dissonance was shattering, leaving behind a raw, blinding panic. She needed to fix this. She was a master of spin, a corporate strategist who navigated hostile takeovers and board mutinies. She could certainly handle a simple case of mistaken identity. "Mr. Fisher," Bobby began, forcing a tight, trembling smile onto her face. Her voice pitched higher, dripping with a desperate, cloying sweetness. "My deepest apologies. You must understand the terminal was absolute chaos this morning. The Skycap service failed entirely, and I was under immense pressure regarding the merger materials. I simply mistook you for airline support staff. It was a terrible oversight, and I assure you my frustration was directed at the situation, not at you personally." Dalen remained standing, his posture relaxed, but commanding. He didn't interrupt her. He let her speak, giving her enough rope to hang herself. "You see," she continued, speaking faster, now her words tumbling over one another, "I am deeply protective of Zenith's assets. I was carrying highly sensitive documents, and my protective instincts simply went into overdrive. I know how highly Vanguard values aggressive, proactive leadership, and I am fully committed to bringing that energy to your executive team." Dalen let the silence hang in the air for 5 full seconds after she finished speaking. He looked at her, his dark eyes stripping away the layers of corporate jargon and desperate excuses. "Aggressive and proactive," Dalen repeated, his voice low, steady, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Ms. Scott, I have been sitting in the terminal and in this cabin for the last hour. I did not observe protective instincts. I observed a senior vice president leverage her perceived status to belittle insult and threaten a man she believed to be an off-duty baggage handler. Bobby opened her mouth to speak, but Dalen raised a single finger, silencing her instantly. You demanded I carry your luggage. You accused me of lying to avoid work. You attempted to have me terminated from a job I do not hold. And when you were informed I was a first-class passenger, you loudly speculated that I had somehow defrauded the airline to be here. Dalen tilted his head slightly, his tone remaining perfectly analytical. Tell me, Bobby, is that the corporate culture you foster at Zenith Innovations, is that how you instruct your junior executives to treat support staff and subordinates? No, of course not. Bobby gasped, her carefully constructed facade crumbling entirely. She looked past Dalen to the Vanguard board members, hoping to find a sympathetic face. Instead, she met the uncompromising gaze of Cynthia Flores Vanguard's head of global human resources. Cynthia was a formidable woman in her 50s, known for her zero-tolerance policies regarding corporate misconduct. Cynthia was looking at Bobby not with anger, but with profound disappointment. It's one thing to be stressed under the pressure of an acquisition, Cynthia interjected quietly from row 4. It is entirely another to display a fundamental lack of basic human decency, Ms. Scott. Culture flows down from leadership. If this is your baseline reaction to a minor logistical inconvenience, it raises severe questions regarding your emotional regulation and judgment. Please, you must understand, Bobby pleaded, tears of genuine panic threatening to spill over her carefully applied mascara. Before she could continue, the main cabin door closed with a heavy mechanical thud echoing through the quiet first-class section. The lead flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. Flight attendants prepared doors for departure and cross-check. The reality of the situation crashed down on Bobby like a physical weight. She was trapped. She was locked inside a metal cylinder 30,000 feet in the air for a 7-hour transatlantic flight with the man she had just verbally abused, who also happened to hold the absolute power to dismantle her entire career. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no PR team to spin the narrative. I suggest you take your seat, Bobby, Dalen said, gesturing toward Suite 2A. We have a long flight ahead of us. We can conclude this conversation once we reach cruising altitude. Bobby collapsed into her luxurious leather seat, her legs giving out from beneath her. She felt nauseous. The bespoke designer suit hanging in the forward closet, the meticulously highlighted dossier on her tray table, none of it mattered anymore. As the massive aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its long taxi down the runway, Bobby stared blankly out the window, watching the tarmac blur past. She had spent 10 years clawing her way to the top of Zenith Innovations, sacrificing friendships, relationships, and basic morality to secure her position. In less than 10 minutes, because she couldn't carry her own bag, she had burned it all to the ground. 2 hours into the flight, the seatbelt sign chimed off, and the cabin was bathed in a soft, ambient blue light designed to induce sleep. The flight attendants moved silently down the aisles, serving warm nuts and pouring expensive wine. For Bobby, the lavish environment felt like a sensory deprivation chamber. She hadn't touched her champagne. She hadn't opened her dossier. She had spent the last 120 minutes playing the incident over and over in her head, desperately searching for a tactical advantage, a loophole, a way to salvage her rapidly evaporating future. She decided her only option was a direct, private appeal. She was a woman who closed multi-million-dollar deals. Surely she could negotiate her own survival. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Bobby unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She smoothed the wrinkles from her jacket and stepped into the aisle. She bypassed her own suite and moved forward to 1A. Dalen was awake. He had his tablet propped up on his tray table, reviewing a complex financial spreadsheet. He had changed out of his hoodie and was now wearing a comfortable dark knit sweater, looking every bit the modern, understated tech CEO. "Mr. Fisher," Bobby whispered, her voice tight and desperate, "may I have a brief moment of your time? Privately." Dalen paused his scrolling and looked up. He assessed her panicked expression, then nodded slowly. He tapped the screen of his tablet, closing the spreadsheet, and gestured to the small companion seat at the edge of his suite. "Have a seat, Bobby." She perched nervously on the edge of the seat, leaning in close so her voice wouldn't carry over the hum of the engines. "Dalen Mr. Fisher, I want to formally and unreservedly apologize for my actions at the gate." Bobby began utilizing every ounce of corporate contrition she could muster. "I was entirely out of line. The stress of this merger has been crushing. Zenith has been my life's work, and knowing Vanguard was coming in, I let the anxiety get the better of me. But I am a brilliant strategist. The portfolio restructuring I have designed for the European division is flawless. You need me for this transition." Dalen listened, his face an impenetrable mask. When she finally paused for breath, he calmly locked his tablet and set it aside. "Your portfolio restructuring plan is adequate, Bobby," Dalen said quietly. "It is technically sound, but you are operating under a fundamental misconception regarding why we acquire companies." Bobby frowned, confused. "We have the best proprietary software in the sector. Vanguard bought us for our tech infrastructure." "Vanguard bought Zenith for its tech infrastructure, yes," Dalen corrected smoothly. "But we integrate companies based on their personnel. A brilliant strategy is utterly worthless if the leadership implementing it is fundamentally toxic. And frankly, your performance at Gate B24 merely confirmed what we already knew." Bobby's blood ran cold. "What? What do you mean, what you already knew?" Dalen pressed a button on his console, and a moment later, Cynthia Flores, the head of HR, stepped quietly forward from row 4. She carried a sleek silver tablet, which she handed to Dalen without a word, before returning to her seat. Dalen unlocked the device and slid it across his tray table toward Bobby. "During our due diligence phase over the past 3 months, Vanguard conducted anonymous cultural audits of Zenith Innovations," Dalen explained, his voice maintaining that terrifying even cadence. "We review financial ledgers, but we also review human capital. This is the executive summary regarding your specific department, Bobby." Bobby stared down at the glowing screen. Her eyes scanned the bullet points, and her stomach dropped violently. "SVP, Bobby Scott Department, turnover rate 42% annually. Industry average 15%. Multiple sealed HR complaints alleging verbal abuse, public humiliation, and impossible off-hour demands. Exit interviews cite hostile work environment and vindictive leadership as primary reasons for departure. SVP routinely blocks lateral transfers of junior staff to maintain departmental control." "You thought you were a brilliant strategist," Dalen said, watching the devastation wash over her face. "But from my perspective, you are a massive operational liability. You bleed talent. You terrorize your junior executives to mask your own insecurities, and you create an environment where fear overrides innovation. We were already planning to discuss a graceful exit strategy for you upon arriving in London." Bobby couldn't speak. Her throat felt completely constricted. The tablet in front of her wasn't just a list of complaints. It was a mirror showing her exactly what she had become. The carefully curated image of the powerful, assertive executive she had built was a lie. To the real power players, she was just a bully. I can change," Bobby whispered, the fight completely drained from her. The arrogant woman from the terminal was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified shell. I can adapt to Vanguard's culture. I'll undergo executive coaching. Whatever you require. Dalen shook his head slowly, a gesture of finality that echoed louder than any shouted reprimand. Character is not something you can send to a corporate seminar to fix, Bobby. Who you are when you think you hold power over someone who you are when you look at a casually dressed man in an airport and decide he is beneath basic human respect, that is who you truly are. Vanguard does not employ people who fundamentally lack empathy. Dalen retrieved the tablet from the tray table and handed it back to Cynthia, who had been watching from the aisle. We will finalize the paperwork at the London office tomorrow morning. Dalen stated his tone, shifting from analytical observer to decisive chief executive. You will be offered a standard severance package contingent upon a non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement clause. Your access to Zenith's servers will be revoked the moment we touch down at Heathrow. You will not be attending the merger meetings. You're firing me, Bobby said, the words slipping out as a breathless, horrified statement of fact. Right now, over the Atlantic. I am securing the future of my newly acquired company, Dalen corrected flawlessly. You may return to your seat, Ms. Scott. Please try to enjoy the remainder of the flight. Bobby stood up, her legs trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the suite divider to steady herself. She looked at Dalen, realizing with crushing certainty that there was no appeal, no higher authority to complain, to no leverage left to pull. She had orchestrated her own professional execution, and she had done it in front of the entire firing squad. She turned and stumbled blindly back to Suite 2A. She collapsed into the seat, pulling the privacy partition door closed with a trembling hand. Shut away from the rest of the cabin, the silence was deafening. She looked down at the heavy embossed dossier on her tray table, the physical representation of a career that no longer existed. For the next 5 hours, as the Boeing 777 hurled through the dark skies over the Atlantic Ocean, Bobby Scott sat in total isolation, trapped in a luxurious flying tomb of her own making, staring blankly at the wall as her entire world burned. The descent into London Heathrow was accompanied by the grey weeping skies, typical of a British morning. The Boeing 777 broke through the thick cloud cover, the massive engines whining as the flaps deployed. Inside the first-class cabin, the mood was a study in profound contrast. Dalen Fisher and the Vanguard Holdings Board members were awake, sharply dressed, and quietly discussing the logistical timeline for the day's press releases. They operated with the synchronized, effortless hum of a well-oiled machine. In Suite 2, Bobby Scott felt as though she were suffocating. She had not slept a single minute. Her eyes were bloodshot, her meticulously styled hair had fallen flat, and her bespoke cream pantsuit was terribly wrinkled from hours of anxious shifting. The dossier on her tray table remained closed, a mocking reminder of her former authority. When the landing gear deployed with a heavy mechanical clunk that vibrated through the floorboards, Bobby closed her eyes, wishing the aircraft would simply turn around and fly back to New York. But reality was rushing up to meet her at 150 miles an hour. The tires screeched against the tarmac, throwing up a spray of rainwater, and the heavy thrust reversers roared to life. The flight was over. Her career was over. As the aircraft taxied to Terminal 3, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Immediately, the first-class passengers began gathering their belongings. Dalen stood smoothly retrieving his leather backpack from the overhead bin. He looked refreshed, the embodiment of a modern leader, stepping confidently into his new empire. He did not look back at Bobby. He simply exchanged a quiet nod with Richard Caldwell and exited the aircraft the moment the jet bridge was secured. Bobby was left to face the logistical nightmare she had created. The flight attendants who had witnessed the entire ordeal at JFK and the mid-air dressing down maintained a polite but frosty professionalism. Sarah Jenkins, the lead attendant, stood by the forward closet. "Your garment bag, Ms. Scott," Sarah said, handing over the heavy, uncreased designer suit that Bobby had demanded be hung perfectly. There was no warmth in her voice, just the flat tone of a woman fulfilling a contractual obligation. "Thank you," Bobby muttered, refusing to meet Sarah's eyes. She turned to her suite and gripped the handle of her massive Rimowa trunk. At JFK, fueled by entitlement and adrenaline, she had aggressively yanked it around. Now completely drained of her power and confidence, the trunk felt as though it were filled with lead. She heaved it over the lip of the suite console, the wheels clattering loudly against the floor. She slung the oversized Goyard tote over her shoulder, the straps instantly digging into her collarbone, and awkwardly draped the heavy garment bag over her arm. As she stepped out of the aircraft and onto the jet bridge, the chilly London air hit her face. There was no VIP skycap waiting for her. There was no corporate liaison with an iPad displaying her name. There was only the long, endless walk toward UK Customs and Border Protection. Ahead of her, she could see Dalen, Richard, and Cynthia, bypassing the standard customs queue, being guided through the expedited diplomatic and executive channel. They moved seamlessly unburdened, while Bobby struggled behind the wheels of her trunk, catching on the grooved flooring of the terminal. By the time she cleared customs and dragged her mountain of luggage out through the sliding glass doors into the arrivals hall, she was sweating profusely, her pristine image entirely shattered. She scanned the line of chauffeurs holding placards. She was looking for the Zenith Innovations driver she had booked weeks ago. She finally spotted a man in a black suit, holding a tablet that read, "B. Scott, Vanguard Logistics." She sagged with relief and limped toward him. "I am Bobby Scott. Take these bags immediately. I need to get to the London office." The driver, a stoic man with a thick earpiece, looked down at his tablet, then at her luggage, and finally at her. "Apologies, Mrs. Scott. My instructions are not to transport you to the main executive office." Bobby froze. What are you talking about? Where are you taking me?" "I have been instructed by Ms. Cynthia Flores of Vanguard Human Resources to transport you to our off-site legal annex in Canary Wharf to finalize your administrative off-boarding," the driver recited mechanically. He did not reach for her bags. "I am also instructed to inform you that Vanguard policies prohibit the transportation of non-essential personal luggage in corporate vehicles during termination procedures. You will need to arrange a separate courier for your oversized items." Bobby stared at him, her mouth opening and closing in sheer disbelief. "You're joking. You expect me to leave my luggage here or haul it into a public cab?" "I am merely following the logistics protocol provided to me, ma'am." The driver replied, his expression unchanging. "The vehicle is waiting outside door 4. We are on a strict timetable." The humiliation was absolute. It was a surgical, bureaucratic dismantling of her ego. The very bags she had tried to force a nobody to carry were now the anchors dragging her down. Defeated Bobby was forced to drag her trunk to a nearby terminal courier desk, paying an exorbitant fee out of her own personal credit card to have them shipped to a hotel she hadn't even booked yet. When she finally slid into the back of the corporate town car, she was empty-handed, stripped of her armor, and utterly alone. The Vanguard Holdings legal annex in Canary Wharf was a far cry from the opulent, glass and steel skyscraper where the main executive offices were housed. It was a sterile, utilitarian building designed for compliance audits and terminations. Bobby was escorted into a windowless conference room equipped with a single metal table, 3 uncomfortable chairs, and a glaring fluorescent light that felt more like an interrogation room than a corporate office. Sitting at the head of the table was Cynthia Flores, flanked by a stern-looking British corporate attorney. There was no coffee offered. There was no small talk. "Have a seat, Bobby," Cynthia said, her tone all business. She pushed a thick stack of stapled documents across the table. Bobby sat down, slowly staring at the paperwork. The header read, Severance and Non-Disclosure Agreement, Zenith Innovations Subsidiary. This is the finalization of your off-boarding. Cynthia began, her voice crisp and efficient. As Mr. Fisher informed you on the flight, Vanguard Holdings is severing your employment effectively immediately. You are receiving a standard 3-month severance package. However, this financial compensation is strictly contingent upon your immediate signature on this non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. Bobby flipped to the second page, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. 3 months I have been a senior vice president for 5 years. My contract with Zenith stipulated a golden parachute of 2 years' salary in the event of an acquisition restructuring. The attorney seated next to Cynthia cleared his throat. That clause, Ms. Scott, was valid only for termination without cause. You are being terminated with cause. With cause? Bobby flared, a tiny spark of her old anger returning. Because of an argument at an airport, you cannot legally prove that constitutes fireable cause. Cynthia leaned forward, resting her hands flat on the table. The look in her eyes extinguished Bobby's anger instantly. We do not need to use the airport incident, Bobby. As I showed you on the tablet, we have compiled 42 pages of documented HR violations, employee testimonies regarding workplace harassment, and evidence of gross mismanagement of personnel. You violated Zenith's own code of conduct dozens of times. We have enough cause to deny you severance entirely and entangle you in litigation for the next decade. Cynthia tapped the stack of papers. Dalen Fisher is a generous man. He does not wish to destroy your life. He simply wishes to remove a toxin from his company. He authorized the 3-month severance as a courtesy. I strongly suggest you take it signed the NDA and quietly exit the industry. Bobby looked down at the pen resting on top of the contract. The reality of the power dynamic was crushing. She had spent years threatening subordinates with their livelihoods, leveraging corporate policy to bend people to her will. Now she was sitting across from true corporate apex predators, and she was thoroughly outmatched. With a trembling hand, Bobby picked up the pen and signed her name on the dotted line. Thank you, Cynthia said smoothly, sliding the documents back across the table and slipping them into a leather folio. Your corporate credentials access badges and Zenith-issued devices have already been deactivated. Security will escort you to the lobby. Goodbye, Bobby. Across town, in the gleaming penthouse boardroom of Vanguard Holdings, Dalen Fisher stood at the head of a massive mahogany table. The room was filled with the remaining executive leadership of Zenith Innovations who had flown in on earlier flights. They looked nervous, exhausted, and acutely aware that their SVP of strategy was missing from the roster. Dalen looked around the room, taking in their anxious faces. He wasn't wearing a hoodie anymore. He wore a sharply tailored dark navy suit that projected absolute authority. Good morning, everyone, Dalen said, his deep voice carrying easily across the expansive room. I know this acquisition has been a period of intense uncertainty for you. I want to assure you that Vanguard Holdings values the innovation and the drive that Zenith has demonstrated over the past decade. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the executives. However, let me be very clear about the culture we are building moving forward. Competence is expected, but competence without empathy is a liability we will not tolerate. We do not evaluate leaders solely by their profit margins. We evaluate them by how they treat the people who have no power to fight back. A murmur rippled through the room. They all knew Bobby's reputation. They had all suffered under her abrasive, tyrannical rule. Leadership is not about making demands from the priority line. Dalen continued, his voice resolute. It is about carrying the weight for your team when the systems fail. It is about respect. Anyone who cannot align with that fundamental truth will not have a seat at this table. The era of toxic brilliance at Zenith is over. Today, we build something better. As the executives broke into genuine relieved applause, Dalen turned to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The London rain had finally stopped, and the grey clouds were beginning to part, revealing patches of bright, piercing blue sky. Miles away, standing on a damp sidewalk outside the Canary Wharf legal annex, Bobby Scott waited for a public taxi. A sleek black corporate town car drove past her, splashing a puddle of cold rainwater against her shins. She didn't yell. She didn't demand to see a manager. She simply shivered, pulled her ruined cream jacket tighter around her shoulders, and stared down at the empty street. For the first time in her life, she had exactly what she deserved. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, you won't want to miss what we have coming next. We dive deep into real-life corporate drama, satisfying karma, and the incredible moments when, entitled, people finally get a taste of reality. Do you think Bobby got what she deserved, or should Dalen have been even harsher? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button. Share this incredible story with your friends who love a good twist, and subscribe to the channel for more daily drama.